Welcome to our new episode. This one is a very exciting one. We have a special guest here. Nick is here with us, and we have Kevin Foley, who is Cropster's sustainability consultant, and he's the man behind our efforts to get B-Corp certified. So welcome, Kevin. Welcome, Nick. How you doing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Uh,
excited to be here. Been listening to some of the episodes for the last, let's say, year plus that you guys have been doing the podcast, and yeah, really cool to be on here to talk to you guys today.
Excellent. We are most excited.
Uh-huh.
Kevin, let's jump right in. Want to give us a little bit of background, who you are, your history, so that our listeners can relate it a little bit.
Yeah, so I've been working in the sustainability field for about 12 years now. And as a kid, I was always just fascinated by Discovery Channel, watching Animal Planet, outdoors, going hiking, just kind of like fell in love with, nature, the natural world. And in college, I actually learned that there were career opportunities and degrees that were aligned with that interest. And I was able to pick up a degree in sustainability, a minor in sustainability, and ended up getting a job in basically an indoor mushroom farm out of college, managing their sustainability program. And did that for about 9 years, and really, boots on the ground, hands-on experience working with a, small business, and really getting to do some neat projects on the sustainability and learning, how business can really make a positive impact in the world. And after doing that for a while, I started to kind of realize that if I really wanted to expand my impact and help other businesses, that it probably was going to make sense to go out on my own and to be able to really, connect with other companies and businesses, and what I'd learned at the farm and help expand that out, and basically expand my reach. So I started that in about 2018, and that was about the time that Norbert, you and I met, and sort of just were chatting about what we did and what our interests were, and that's when I learned about Cropster and was really just intrigued, and we sort of stayed in touch for maybe 6 months or so, and I think you invited me out to the SCA in Seattle, I believe it was that year.
Yes, that's
and
right.
so that was kind of my first big introduction actually to the coffee space, specialty coffee space. And we spent, I think, 3 days just fully immersed, watching you walk around like a celebrity at the conference.
No,
It just
that's not true.
how tight knit a group was, how connected everybody was. And
Mhm.
shortly thereafter, we kind of figured out that there was an opportunity to maybe start looking into doing some work together with Cropster. And so that's kind of a brief background on me and how I got into the field, and then how we came to start collaborating and how we met. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So I want to dive into a little bit like sustainability. What does it mean? It's everywhere. You can see it in all the conferences, in all kinds of publications. It seems like every company is doing something um, to be sustainable. What's your take on that? And how
Yeah.
should we think about it?
Yeah. So sustainability, it's a, you could say it's a buzzword that has been around for a long time, can mean different things to different people and different businesses. But I think sort of like a really high level definition that I've always appreciated and think kind of encapsulates it well is taking care of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to take care of their own needs. So it's sort of like, how do we live and operate as a society in a way that doesn't degrade the system and preserves it, but I think sort of where it's headed, and something that I think is really important, is rather than just like preserving as the status quo, it's more, how do we regenerate the system and help it become, like, the system become healthier over time as a result of practices at businesses, government, nonprofit, and just how we live. How do we live in a way that's more regenerative rather than consumptive and taxing and taking and extracting. And so I think the high level sustainability is looking at your impacts, environmental, social impacts, and figuring out how to make improvements on those, preferably reduce the negative impacts and then work towards actually generating positive impacts. So it's sort of like a quick summary of how I sort of view it.
Yeah, it's that's fascinating. It's exactly why we are here today, and that's also part of why Cropster exists. But it's not that easy, right? To do that, to implement that. And I think that's leads a little bit to what we're trying to do with like the B-Corp. But still, before we go there, maybe you can still dive a little bit deeper in and say what does this all mean for companies? Like what can we look out for?
Yeah. So the definition I shared is very high level. So it's like, okay, how do you know if a company is doing that? And that's an interesting topic and question, because I think over the last decade there's been a lot of what you could call greenwashing, where there's a lot of claims around sustainability and green or natural, and not necessarily any tangible or measurable means of backing up these claims. And so that's just something that at a high level, I think it's important to be aware of. If you see a claim, it's like, okay, what does that really mean? And for when I look at a business, it's okay, what are we measuring our environmental impacts? That's kind of like a first step. How much energy are we using? What are what types of emissions are coming out? Scope 1, 2, 3, water, both consumption and waste. Those are sort of like really tangible, quantifiable ways to measure impact. And then there's also the social side. So how do we treat our stakeholders? That's employees, customers, suppliers, the entire supply chain. Essentially is how are we sourcing our materials? What are the conditions for our employees? And even upstream, what are the conditions of the employees of the companies where we're purchasing product from that we use as our inputs? And then where does that end up going? And then how is our end product recycled? Or does it go straight to landfill? Or is there a way to create sort of a closed loop system, reduce, reuse, recycle? So I think that sustainability, I guess we're speaking more in the context of a business. There's ways for businesses to do that, and that can vary depending on the business. So, if you're running a big farming operation, for instance, like what your operational impacts are probably going to be the largest percentage of your impact for, energy usage, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and waste, both solid waste as well as water waste. But then, for instance, for a software company, maybe that's a smaller percentage. You have some offices, you've got some servers, you've got computers, equipment, maybe small kitchen offices. But the what you would call the office impacts, the scope 1 and 2 emissions for purchased electricity and direct on-site combustion are going to be rather small. But then your scope 3, which is upstream in the supply chain and downstream, that's where you're going to start seeing more opportunity and more, ways to really make an impact. And, that's one of the things we've kind of really digging to with Cropster the last several years is, hey, our offices are very small, but we do a fair amount of travel. So let's quantify those, emissions from airline travel. And, we've been doing that since 2018. So that's, I guess the point here is to just highlight that different businesses and different industries will have, different ways of really digging into that. But on a high level, it's, gathering data, looking at data, what are we doing? Where do we stand? And how does that stand up against others in the industry? And then, also does that stand up against, maybe global targets for, reducing emissions, hitting renewable energy targets. So I think that, it's important to look at what companies and businesses are saying to see if what their claims are stating actually align with some real data and that they're backed up with, real, evidence, you could say. So, I think, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, no, go for it. I'm a little delayed. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. That I think that was the long-winded answer to Norbert's question.
No, what I was going to ask, was, so there's a lot that obviously goes into sustainability and there's a lot to think about. It seems like, it's the environment, it's the social impact part of it. But before we get into, like the deeper part of for why Cropster decided to pursue the B-Corp and whatnot, I have a question for Norbert, and that is, what is it about, you having a software company where people may not think that our environmental impact is as great as an agricultural company? What makes you passionate about wanting to make sure that Cropster is a leader in being an overall sustainable business?
Yeah, it's an excellent one. Thank you, Nick, for asking that. It all comes or goes back to when we started the company. We want to help the coffee supply chain. We want to help farmers. We want to connect the different parts of the supply chain, and we want to create a more connected and more positive and more long-term sustainable world. Initially, from an economic perspective, giving opportunities to farmers, but very quickly also realizing if the farmers are not able to produce anymore because of climate change or because of prices or because of impacts to their agricultural practices or land, that all is meaningless. So we need to think beyond, and I think that thought has arrived in many industries. I think we're not the first ones to do that. Just to say, it's so exciting. I just talked to a friend yesterday. He is in the automotive industry back in Austria, which is like a totally different supply chain. And he told, and he, surprise, I met him 2 years ago, and we haven't talked for a while. And he said, "No, I'm not looking more into sustainability." And he said, "Well, actually, car manufacturers are measured not only by their own outputs and by their own waste and by how they produce, but also by their products." It's basically, hey, if you put a car on the road, if you produce a product which is less sustainable, you get judged by that, and you get either taxed or you there's certain implications. Now, those details I don't know, but I thought it's that's fascinating. So we are not only responsible for what we as a company do, but also what our products do to the world. And I think that's what we wanted, right? We wanted software products helping the world being more sustainable, and just doing that and not being sustainable on our own, that felt like that's not right. So we kind of develop from the other side. Like, let's help the world. Well, if we want to do that, then we as a company also need to abide by the same rules and do better. I think that's that's how it all happened. It took a little bit of a while, I think, just to get organized and there's so many things to think when you create a company. And also I think the world has changed a little bit. Now it's getting more and more normal. I just bought a flight ticket and you see like, hey, this is the CO2. It's on the ticket. It's like, thank God, like this needs to happen. It's such a painful and cumbersome process to figure out our impact.
Yeah.
At least 5 years ago, it was, or it still kind of is the process we have set up internally. It takes a lot of time, and we need to register each flight leg and there's a lot of things happening in the background. And my wish would be, well, we just scan a QR code for each trip and it's registered and it's potentially offset. I like to be, and that's another thing, like we also like to be a proactive part in that, to say, well, this is our damage we do. How can we make it right? And then not just go maybe for the cheapest option, but for something which is also meaningful to us, which in return creates a more meaningful and more sustainable world for us, I think, in general. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. it's a wild ride. So with that question, I would like to go further with Kevin, of looking into our journey from the first thought. Well, B-Corp was not our first thought, actually. It was like, well, we want to do more sustainability work. And then B-Corp kind of came to us via some students, if I recall correctly, in Canada,
Yeah.
who offered us a free consultation through their learning journey on what B-Corp would mean. And then they asked us all the tough questions. As Kevin, do you remember?
Yeah. No, we had started sort of, just on a higher level, and then I think there was an opportunity to, collaborate with some of those students, and you were aware of B-Corp along with the other founders, and it was something that you felt very positively toward, and had that idea was up there. So when I think when that opportunity came along, it was just a really natural hey, yeah, let's dive into that and see where we stand. And I think the neat thing about that is just like it's a very quantifiable framework that you can basically, it's like you're holding up a mirror to your company and like, hey, where do we how do we fill this out? Where are we strong? Where do we need a little work? And ultimately, what is that number, that a numerical score between 1 and 200? Where do we land? Like that's kind of one of the neat things about it, is it actually is like, it's almost like you're punching information into an algorithm and it spits out a score, and then kind of tells you at a very high level, here's how your performance is going right now across these different areas. And you can kind of use that as a sort of a roadmap or a guide to decide how you move forward in the ways that are most impactful or meaningful at that time.
That's also what I like. And you mentioned it before, is you start measuring, right? The first step is always to see where do you stand, what is actually going on. And that to me was a little bit the blurry thing. Like, do we stand, and how do we start measuring? And I know, I mean, we even developed a GHG, greenhouse gas calculator at Cropster 10, 12 years ago. And I still remember, it looked beautiful. It was amazing, but it wasn't the right thing for the right time. But we we were connected to the topic, and then knew like this is one of the biggest things, transportation. And coffee, there's a lot of transportation in the supply chain. It's a global business.
Yeah.
So it is impactful. But still, like through that project, I learned there's so many ways. Like my IT brain went to oh, we need to do this on a very detailed level. Everything else is lying. It's like counting your steps, right? If you don't count your steps, how would you know you're out? And it's like that's not how it works. I mean, it can work that way, but sometimes a good estimate is very valid, and it works very well for that. But starting that measurement, where do we start measuring, and how do we measure?
Yeah, that's the most important step. Otherwise, how will you ever know if you're, get to your destination or making a difference?
And I think that's where the B-Corp brought us this framework, saying, hey, these are the questions, these are the measurements you should take. And we realized when we started that some of the things were like, yeah, that's second nature. We measure that anyway, or we measure that because we want to know, or also we measure that because a company has to know.
Yeah.
And then other parts were like, oh, that's how you measure it. We need to set this up. So we need to set us up to get certain things in order. And that is also very, it's a process, and it took us a while, and you have to put resources to those tasks. And I always say, and that's not new, if you measure at the point where the data happens, it is the least painful moment. But if you measure later, there's a lot of after work and afterthought which needs to go into it, and it's more painful and not so straightforward. So figuring out that like data happening point and tapping into that, ideally in a most automated way, is in general the most successful way, but it's not always possible.
Yeah. I think that what you're saying is sort of also, really drives home how important it is to really, sustainability should be like a regular part of a company's processes. I think like 10 years ago or more, it was, sustainability either was non-existent in a company, or it was more like, renewing your driver's license every several years. You'd kind of like check in and, okay, like what are we doing, write a report. But, I think that to really make progress, it needs to be more like, at the minimum, like more like going to the dentist every quarter. You've got reporting processes, you're tracking it, you're measuring it. And then in between those checkpoints, there's activity happening on a daily, weekly basis. And that's, where this really comes in is being authentic about what you're doing, but also, having the resources there to actually get the data, measure it, put it into the system, communicate it across, the company as well as stakeholders as needed. And, it doesn't just do itself. It doesn't take care of itself. It's a conscious effort. And, I think that B-Corp, the nice thing about that framework is, you can continue building on it. It's like you could say it's a never ending journey. There's always room for improvement. So it's, that's, I think, exciting. It can be overwhelming at first when you see everything and you're like, wow, this is so much stuff. How do we even start? But at the same time, once you just start putting one foot in front of the other, implementing some programs, making some progress, it actually becomes really inspiring. And, I think the opportunities are, endless, really. And for, I think, to your point, Norbert, I mean, your vision for when you started the company, it's like you started almost like the front of the supply chain at origin with the growers. And it's like, how do you, the impact you make through your product, it's like the sky is the limit. I think that's what's so exciting about Cropster when it comes to sustainability is, you just touch so many different stakeholders, and, you really have the ability to generate a positive impact across the whole supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's what's kind of like that's what fascinates me about the B Corp, and you said it a few times, is framework. I mean, what I really actually find valuable about B Corp, it's not just another certification. It's to me, it seems like it's a meaningful, valuable certification that promotes sustainability because it gives you a practical framework and a practical blueprint to create structures that enhance and promote like sustainability across all levels. And like that's one thing I appreciate is that, like I said, it's not just another stamp on someone's coffee bag or website or whatever it is. It's like you see that stamp and you know that there's actually a lot of structural value behind it that is, it's positive. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating for sure.
And that was one of the ways we thought about it from the beginning. We never thought about it as we need that seal on our website. How do we get this as quickly and as fast or as cheap? It was more like, what can B Corp? How can B Corp help us be better in our business? And how does it help us to create that structure so that the company can thrive better? And through that, well, you earn different points, and the points add up. And once you have enough points, you can get this seal. Which, I mean, I'm now, after those years, I feel quite proud to see my face and the logo. Right, I never saw that this would have that effect, but it has. Right,
Yeah.
we see the Cropster logo, we see the B-Corp logo go well together. But it was not it intended as a marketing effort, and I'm also very proud of that. It's more like how do we get sustainability into our DNA in a structured way, where it doesn't depend on a founder, where it doesn't depend on one person, and it shouldn't depend, because that would be that unnatural side kick or CSR department or whatever it is, in my opinion. Right? It should be it's everybody's job. And
Yeah.
well, we help, right, Kevin? So I mean, that's where we are there for the company to support everybody in their efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, based on what you and also Nick, what you said about the meaning behind it, I think that is one of the kind of refreshing aspects of B Corp certification also is that, that when you do see that stamp, it's like, hey, that means something. I know that there's like a very, quantifiable framework that's been well thought out by a lot of folks on, how to actually measure if a business can back up these claims they're making. And it sort of signals to, a consumer or a potential, employee of a company looking for a, job candidate, customer, like, hey, this means something. And I appreciate, there's a certification that's really comprehensive that covers every aspect of a business that can kind of give you a little confidence when you see that. Kind of to our earlier point about potentially a lot of greenwashing happening over the last decade. It's like you can kind of weed out based on some of the like B Corp. It's like, hey, I know that carries weight, and that's it's a signal of effort that's gone into it. And I think that the journey, it took us several years, and we did it slow and we did it methodically in a way that made sense for us. And I think that that's just another example, like you said, of kind of doing it for the right reasons. And it's like we know how to approach it, why it's important, and if we don't get it this month, the stamp this month, hey, that's fine. We know why we're here, and we're working toward it. So
Yeah.
it's
I think it's also quite interesting to see the structure is set up in a way that it grows with the company. So I'm also a little bit like surprised or like, oh yeah, it's not a skill you earn once and then you have to do like as you said, Kevin, 2 reports a year and then you're good, because that's not the case. It always ties into company numbers and things which change over time. And once they change, you got to see how everything else changes around. And it gets actually a little bit harder as you grow, which is also good, because as you grow, there should be more thought and more energy going into the program.
yeah. I think that the idea is, the bigger the company, the bigger the potential impact, and there should be a little bit more accountability there. And so it's and the framework, I think, is it's evolving over time. There's a whole bunch of standards analysts that are always evaluating the certification and getting feedback from all sorts of stakeholders on how do we make this better, how do we make this more meaningful, how do we create a greater impact and maintain that transparency and authenticity with what we're doing.
So I'm curious from a a consultancy perspective, how do you go about giving advice for a company like Cropster that wants to become B-Corp, but with it being such a global company with employees all over the world, not just in Austria and in the US, I can imagine there's even more thought and consideration that has to go into it. So I'm wondering what your perspective is and how you how you went through that process of so many things to consider around the world.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, that's a really, first off, good point to just highlight, a global software company versus, let's say, a single facility, a food company or a manufacturing company that just has one location in one city. And hey, everything is right there. Granted, they're going to have, upstream supply chain, for raw materials, but it's a very local team. And Cropster having a global team all over the world, customers all over the world, I think that it definitely brings another level of, maybe complexity, but at the same time, it's I think there's kind of a core team, and with working with Norbert has really made that part easy because, Norbert and the founders have really been thinking about sustainability since day one. Whereas I think a lot of businesses are maybe haven't had that high level focus on it from the beginning. It's already in the DNA. So it's kind of a natural extension of how do we maintain our growth goals and our purpose, but start overlaying really what it was is more formal processes. How do we start gathering this data that we have? We just maybe how much energy are we using, how much waste, the emissions from airline travel, that was something that was already looking at 10 years ago. It's just we started kind of quantifying it at a more granular level and in a way that the reporting is more automatic and always working to make that more automatic. But yeah, I think that, there's certain fundamental principles that are pretty universal. It's you've got, a business with its core product offerings, its core team, how do you make the operation sustainable, but then, how do you make the product sustainable, and then are there ways for you to engage with the supply chain to make it even more sustainable? And I think that the difference with Cropster is you have more opportunities to really engage because you touch so many different points in a really direct way. So yeah,
I think that that global approach we have is a little bit challenging, of course. And as you said, Kevin, if you have one location, it's probably easier. Now we have multiple, but it also pushes us um, to that level of what is the best practice here and there, and how can we not run double standards, because that's just not how it can be reported and how it can be. Now there's a few legal differences, which those of course we cannot change on our own, but there's always choices you can make as a company, and I think that also brought us more together as our teams work together globally and not only locally. They're not isolated, and that I think that's beautiful to see how the certification and the collaboration and um, the teams in those different countries are, in my opinion, more aligned through that certification effort.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's been a really, kind of exciting way to engage the whole company, really. I mean, because it's, there's questions covering every aspect of the business, from, finance, HR, sales, customer success, products, IT. It's just like it touches everything. So you're really needing to engage across the entire company. And I think that's sort of like a natural extension for sort of, the higher level goal for 2023 is to begin really embedding sustainability into the DNA of, every department. How how does it become to where, rather than like just, you always need a kind of a high level hand to guide the effort, but like when you can no longer separate sustainability from just normal operations, it's like they're one and the same.
Yeah, I'm wondering if also you can maybe speak a little bit on offsetting. I've heard you mention that a few times now, and for a software company like Cropster, for example, being remote, we do kind of, as employees and as people who work remotely, we crave that kind of human interaction, and we're going to be traveling, we're going to be taking planes, and I don't, and until boats or trains get faster, I don't see us going away from planes anytime soon. So I'm wondering, if a company like ours, we rely a lot on like air travel, where what does offset mean? Like where do we then do our part in offsetting that part of our impact on the environment, for example? Like what does that look like, and what does that kind of mean for someone like us?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So basically what we're doing is quantifying how many tons of CO2 emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions are being generated from air travel on an annual basis. So, for instance, let's say that's 100 tons. We basically quantify that, look at that across the entire company. So all of the global flight trips for, team members, both in Austria and the US, as well as other places. And then we're basically looking at a way to purchase. So we actually purchase certified, verifiable CO2 offsets. So like we are actually like making a purchase of offsets that are being generated, somewhere in the world. So we've purchased offsets, for example, for a clean energy project, or planting trees. There's a couple of companies that are actually certified B-Corp that sell offsets that we've purchased from, which is really cool to kind of start purchasing, looking to our suppliers and giving preference to B-Corps.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically you're quantifying that, and then you're actually like shopping on the market to find a CO2 offset that aligns most closely with Cropster's values, which is if there's offsets in the coffee supply chain, that's you could say that's a form of insetting. So you're like actually creating offsets within your own supply chain, and that's one way to look at it. But yeah, we're actually like purchasing, verified offsets, that means like or taking the 100-ton example, means 100 tons of emissions have been verified and offset somewhere in the world, and we are taking ownership of those offsets so that no one else can use them. It's like our name is on that. Those are verified. Those have been used. There's no those cannot be sold again. Those are like locked in, and the idea is that you're making sure that those are locked in essentially, versus I think in the past there was offsets that like maybe a same offset was sold multiple times, so you're not actually getting that true offset. And I think that's the industry has really been cracking down on that, and you become a lot more reliable. So that when you purchase that offset, it's you're getting what you're paying for, and that's got your name on it, and it will not be sold to anybody else. So
wow. I mean, this seems like so simple, but I'm like mind blown right now. When you said planting trees, I'm like, wow. If everybody planted trees for all the tons they used, this world would be so much better. And it's that simple. But I mean, I wish it was that simple, but it's like a mind blowing thing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean,
yeah, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's not that complicated. So we, yes, you need a little bit of effort to look at the companies, the right partners for you, and I'm really grateful for you, Kevin, doing all that work, because it takes a little bit to find that. But once you know in what space you want to be and that you find a good company, it is not that hard. It's basically just pay a bill, and you've done what you wanted to do. And then there's more to come, right? So the more exciting things is getting those offsets closer and closer to our ecosystem, as you said, in setting. What can we do to support our customers, to support like farmers, support companies who take or can offer offsets, and then also what can we do as in our own ecosystems of, is there a way of putting solar on our offices, or is there a way of creating different ways of using energy, change light settings? And it's sometimes it's small things, and they're small in impact and are quite big projects to do, especially a technology shift. For example, changing the whole lighting system in an office is a little bit a task, and comes at a certain cost where you might not see. I mean, you will never get that money back on efficiencies, but you've done something for the future for so many reasons. Of investing in technology always means that technology becomes more accessible and more available for other people. I mean, the people who purchased the first computers, that was not a good deal in terms of efficiencies, right? They just invested in technology, and now it's available for everybody.
Yeah. It's I think that what you touched on, Norbert, I mean, that is the exciting part, is how do you eventually, rather than purchasing offsets from a third party, is there a way that we've actually expanded to be actually reducing the emissions within our own supply chain, to where we are actually sort of guiding that. And like I could see that being a potential future scenario, and I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think that there's a lot of potential, and it's kind of like we're directionally correct. We're headed in the right direction, and as you keep moving forward, more opportunities present themselves to really generate a greater positive impact, and do that within your own operation, your own supply chain.
Well, speaking about the future, right? That's there's so much more to come, as the certification is kind of now is an intermediary step, in my opinion. to have a structure in place, which we can now use for the future. But there's more, especially when we look at our products, where we look at our customers. How can we interact more? And as you said, there's nothing we can announce today. I hope we be able in future episodes to talk about those things in more detail. But helping our customers, I mean, we know a lot of our customers are roasters or use transportation of goods, transportation of green coffee, transportation of roasted coffee. That's all there. And tapping into that by helping measure, as I alluded to earlier, helping measure easier, quicker, cheaper, so that the numbers are on the table. And then we have a global network, so we can compare, we can help maybe introduce solutions which help everybody in the industry, which might be very complicated for one company at a time. That's also part of why Cropster exists, because there was a need for an entire industry to have solutions, software solutions. And if we can apply that same paradigm or that same idea into the sustainability sector, I think that makes us so much more interesting and exciting, and motivates us as a company to move more towards that goal. So I would say you get that, I always compare with cars because it's so tangible, but you get that car which comes with all those extra benefits, and by driving it, you are doing good for the environment. I mean, it's an outrageous thought right now, but maybe at some point, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think it's a natural evolution for Cropster. And, if you look back to how it started, it's all, it just all is a very, I think, natural flow, and really, expanding on those relationships that are so dear to everything in the industry, and, aligning those, core competencies and skills with, hey, how do we branch that out into maybe helping in this area? We're already helping our customers in all these different areas. How do we overlay this other, potentially impactful, data set and make it meaningful and actionable? So it's really, the sky is the limit. I mean, that's the neat thing about sustainability in general, is there's so much room for creativity and innovation to really help drive things forward. That's what we need.
Yeah. And that's what excites me, right? How can we push the boundaries? How can we do a little bit better? It's not easy. No, it's not easy, right? And what I just said, it's like, that's totally crazy. Well, there must be something we can do. And I always believe that, right? That's that, like, there is something positive which will come out of it. There's something we can do. I never want to settle for, oh, we're doomed and this is like this is it, because it's not it. And that drives us, really, and it drives me, and it drives everybody at Cropster, in this company.
100%.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
okay.
I was actually, the other day I was reading an article, and it was talking about how, there's so much negativity in the news around climate and the environment, and like how that's impacting younger generations, and kind of also like an apathy toward, like, well, there's nothing anyone can do, or doomed. It's like, no, I don't think that's the case at all. It's like there's always something to do, and how do you maintain that, inspiration and that excitement toward solving problems, and having that agency, or that sense of agency to push forward, even though it's sometimes bleak picture. If you look at it a certain way, it's like, hey, I understand that, but we're moving forward anyways. We're going to continue onward, and it does make a difference. So
we always have a choice, right? When we see the weather out there and it's not getting better, or the patterns in general are not getting better, you can always like go towards the oh, we're doomed and there's nothing we can do. I think it's always a choice, but it's always something like there is something we can do. There must be something we can do, and there's a lot of good out there, and there's people who are interested, and even small things already count. And that's the other thing. Like, oh, only big things, only the big corporations, only big governments. Is that not true? Like small things, right? And start there, and then scale. And we are compared to many others a small company, but that I truly think we can impact.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the neat things about B Corp too is it does draw in a lot of smaller purpose-driven businesses that are like, hey, we're not a big multinational corporation, but we make a difference. We make a really big difference, and let's build that community because we're just as a global society, we're all just a sum of the parts. As individuals, we make up the whole, and the more individuals, the more small businesses, small companies that take that step, the better off we're all going to be.
Exciting times, I'm sure. Kevin, I thank you so very much for being part of our podcast today. Thanks for accompanying us through all those years in our journey, and we look forward to together with you create our future.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you for all the
thank you, Norbert.
Positive work and value put into Cropster, not just Cropster, but all the companies you're helping. It's very, very inspired and motivated.
Yeah, well, very excited to be doing the work, and looking forward to all the things that we have ahead of us.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much.